The morning air of what was supposed to be the happiest day of Sophie's life felt unnaturally still. Sunlight streamed through the large window of the bridal suite, illuminating the millions of dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, shimmering star. Her wedding dress, a cascade of ivory lace and silk, hung from a tall armoire, looking like a silent promise of a future she was stepping into alone. Everything was perfect, meticulously planned, except for the one detail that mattered most. The two people who were supposed to be by her side were absent. Her parents had made their position painfully clear from the moment she had announced her engagement to James. He was a good man, a kind soul with a laugh that could chase away the darkest clouds. He was a musician, a dreamer who painted melodies in the air. But to her parents, he was not suitable. He didn't come from a world of corporate ladders and secure investments. He came from a world of passion, risk, and art, a world they saw as unstable and beneath their daughter. "It's not a life, Sophie," her father had said, his voice cold and clipped. "It's a hobby." Her mother had stood beside him, her expression a mixture of disappointment and pity, which was somehow worse. Sophie had tried everything. She had arranged dinners that turned into interrogations, conversations that became lectures. She had pleaded, argued, and cried, hoping to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But their stance was unmovable. They saw her choice not as an act of love, but as an act of rebellion. The final blow came a week before the wedding. "We cannot support this union," her mother had written in a short, sterile text message. "Therefore, we will not be attending." The words had felt like a physical slap. There would be no father to walk her down the aisle, no mother to help her with her veil. Now, sitting in front of a gilded mirror, Sophie watched as the makeup artist applied a touch of blush to her cheeks. "You're looking a little pale, honey," the woman said kindly, her name tag reading Doris. "Nerves are normal." Sophie forced a weak smile. It wasn't just nerves. It was a deep, aching void where her parents' support should have been. Her phone lay on the vanity, silent. She had held on to a sliver of hope that they would change their minds at the last minute, that a call would come, a message, anything. But there was nothing. Her bridesmaids bustled around her, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in her chest. They talked about the flowers, the beautiful weather, how handsome James looked in his suit. They carefully avoided the topic of her parents, a silence that spoke volumes. They were trying to protect her, but their gentle handling of her feelings only made the wound feel more tender. "Okay, all done," Doris announced, stepping back to admire her work. "You look breathtaking, dear." Sophie looked at her reflection. A bride stared back, her hair woven into an elegant chignon, her eyes framed by delicate makeup. She looked the part, but she felt like an imposter. A tear escaped and traced a glistening path down her cheek, a tiny rebellion against the carefully constructed image of bridal joy. She quickly wiped it away, but not before her maid of honor, Sarah, saw it. Sarah rushed to her side, her own eyes welling with sympathy. "Oh, Sophie, don't. Please don't let them ruin this day for you. James is waiting for you. He loves you more than anything." "I know," Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's just, I always dreamed my dad would be the one to give me away. I feel so alone." It was in that moment of raw vulnerability, as the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, that a soft knock echoed at the door. One of the bridesmaids opened it to reveal Sophie's grandfather, George. He stood there, a man carved from a different era, his back straight despite his 80 years, his eyes holding the gentle wisdom of a long life. He held a worn, yellowed envelope in his hand. He wasn't wearing the simple suit he had planned for as a guest. Instead, he was dressed in a sharp, distinguished tuxedo, a white gardenia pinned to his lapel. "George," Sophie breathed, her heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing here? I thought you were already at the venue." He walked into the room, his presence commanding a sudden, respectful silence. He smiled at her, a warm, reassuring expression that had been a constant source of comfort throughout her life. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he said, his voice raspy with age but firm with purpose. "And it seems there's a position that has recently opened up. The position of the man who gets the honor of walking the most beautiful bride in the world down the aisle." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming relief, of a love so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. She stood up from the vanity chair and rushed into her grandfather's arms, burying her face in the crisp fabric of his tuxedo jacket. The familiar scent of old books and subtle cologne, a scent she had associated with him since childhood, enveloped her. He held her tightly, his hand gently stroking her hair. There, my girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "It's all right. I'm here." The bridesmaids, who had been watching with a mixture of awe and relief, began to discreetly gather their things. George looked over Sophie's shoulder at them and offered a gentle, appreciative nod. "If you ladies wouldn't mind giving us just a moment," he asked softly. Sarah, her maid of honor, gave Sophie's arm a final, supportive squeeze before leading the others out of the room, closing the door quietly behind them. Alone with her grandfather, Sophie pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice still shaky. "The tuxedo? Everything?" "Nonsense," George replied, his eyes twinkling as he looked her up and down. "Do you think I'd let my granddaughter walk down the aisle looking like a queen, with a mere peasant by her side? I had to look the part." He straightened his bow tie with a playful air of dignity, and Sophie let out a watery laugh. For the first time all day, a genuine smile reached her eyes. "But that's not the only reason I'm here," he said, his expression softening. He held up the yellowed envelope he had been carrying. It was old, the paper soft and fragile with age, addressed to Sophie, in a looping, elegant cursive she hadn't seen in years. "I have something for you. Something your grandmother Eleanor wanted you to have." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother had passed away 5 years ago, a gentle, loving woman who had been the heart of their family. She had been Sophie's confidant, her greatest cheerleader. "She gave this to me shortly before she left us," George explained, his voice thick with the memory. "She said, 'George, on the day Sophie gets married, I want you to give this to her, especially if she needs it.'" He looked at Sophie, his gaze full of meaning. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. She knew that love doesn't always follow the rules others set for it. She knew you had a lion's heart, just like hers." With trembling fingers, Sophie took the letter. It felt warm, as if it still held a trace of her grandmother's touch. She carefully broke the brittle wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same beautiful, faded script filled the page. She began to read. "My dearest Sophie, if you are reading this, then it is your wedding day. I am not there to see you, but I am imagining you, beautiful and radiant, on the precipice of a wonderful new life. I know that you have found a person who makes your soul sing. Do not ever let anyone dim that music. Love, true love, is not a business transaction or a social contract. It is a wild, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying leap of faith. It is choosing a person every single day and building a world together. When I met your grandfather, my own parents had their doubts. He was a poet, they said, a man with his head in the clouds. He was not sensible. They wanted me to choose a life that looked good on paper, but I chose a life that felt good in my heart. Standing with him, I felt seen. I felt home. It was the single best decision of my life, and I have never, for a single moment, regretted it. I know your parents love you. Your mother, my daughter, was raised in a world that values security, that fears the unknown. Fear can make love a very rigid and controlling thing. I beg you, do not let their fear become your cage. They may not understand the masterpiece you are painting with your life, because they are only able to see the numbers in a ledger. So, walk down that aisle, my darling girl. Walk towards the life you have chosen with your head held high. Walk towards the arms of the one you love, knowing that you are worthy, you are brave, and you are making the most important choice of all, the choice to be happy. Your heart knows the way. Trust it. All my love, always, your grandmother, Eleanor. By the time Sophie finished reading, fresh tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure catharsis. The letter was a balm on the raw wound of her parents' rejection. It was permission, validation, and a fierce declaration of love from beyond the grave. She knew, Sophie whispered, looking up at George. She knew this might happen. George nodded, his own eyes misty. She knew you had her spirit, and she knew that a strong spirit sometimes has to walk a difficult path. He gently took her hand. "The choice is yours, Sophie, but your grandmother and I are right here with you." Sophie looked from her grandmother's words to her grandfather's loving face. The emptiness in her chest was gone, replaced by a warm, fierce resolve. She was not the abandoned daughter. She was the granddaughter of Eleanor, a woman who chose love over expectation. She was the granddaughter of George, a man who would wear a tuxedo and stand in the gap without a moment's hesitation. She took a deep breath, her spine straightening. She squeezed her grandfather's hand. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's go get me married." A ghost of a smile played on George's lips. "That's my girl," he said with pride. He offered her his arm, and as Sophie linked hers with his, she felt a current of strength pass between them. The fragile, heartbroken girl from an hour ago was gone, replaced by a woman ready to claim her own happiness. Together, they walked out of the bridal suite and towards the grand staircase that led to the main hall. The murmur of the waiting guests was a low hum on the other side of the tall oak doors. The wedding march began, the first familiar, resonant notes of the organ filling the air. This was the moment she had been dreading, the public display of her parents' absence. But now, with her grandfather's steady presence beside her, the dread had vanished. This was no longer a walk of shame, but a procession of honor. 2 ushers pulled the heavy doors inward, and a river of light and sound flooded the entryway. Every head in the pews turned. Sophie could feel hundreds of eyes on her, and she knew they were all seeing the same thing. The bride, with her radiant smile, being escorted not by her father, but by her grandfather. She could sense the initial flicker of confusion, the whispers that would inevitably ripple through the crowd. But then she saw the expressions shift. They softened into looks of understanding, of admiration, of deep, shared emotion. They weren't just watching a bride walk down the aisle. They were witnessing a profound act of love. Sophie's gaze, however, was fixed on one person alone. At the end of the aisle, standing before a beautiful archway of white roses and ivy, was James. He looked impossibly handsome. His eyes locked on her. She saw the moment he realized it was George by her side. His expression morphed from adoration to something deeper. His chin quivered almost imperceptibly, and his eyes glistened as he took in the sight, the old man in the sharp tuxedo, proudly escorting the woman they both loved. It was a look of immense gratitude, of respect for the man who had stepped in when her own father had stepped out. In that silent, shared glance, Sophie knew James understood everything. The walk felt like it took both a lifetime and a single heartbeat. The faces of friends and extended family blurred into a watercolor of smiles and happy tears. All that was real was the firm grip of her grandfather's arm and the magnetic pull of the man waiting for her. As they reached the altar, George paused. He turned to Sophie, his weathered face full of a love that spanned generations. He gently lifted her veil, his touch as light as a feather, and kissed her on the cheek. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he whispered, his voice for her ears only. Then, he turned to James. He took Sophie's hand and placed it firmly into James's outstretched one. For a moment, his own hand covered both of theirs, a silent blessing passing between the 3 of them. He looked James directly in the eye, his gaze steady and clear. "This is the best of us," George said, his voice low but firm. "You take care of her." "With my life, sir," James replied, his own voice thick with emotion. George nodded once, a gesture of complete trust. He gave Sophie's hand a final squeeze before stepping back to take his seat in the front row, a seat that was not empty, but filled by the truest patriarch their family had. The officiant, a kind-faced woman with a warm smile, began the ceremony. Her words about the joining of 2 people, the creation of a new family, resonated with a power and poignancy that no one in the room could ignore. This was not just a ritual, it was a testament. When the time came for the vows, Sophie and James turned to face each other, their hands clasped tightly. James went first, his voice unwavering. "Sophie," he began, "from the moment I met you, I knew I had found my home. You are the melody I didn't know I was missing. You are fierce and kind, and you love with your whole heart. I promise to honor that heart, to build a world with you where your spirit can be free, where our days are filled with music and laughter. I choose you today and every day, for the rest of my life." As Sophie listened, she glanced at the front row where her parents should have been. The empty chairs were still there, a stark symbol of their choice. But for the first time, seeing them didn't cause a pang of pain. It brought a sense of clarity. Her family was not defined by absence, but by presence. Her family was the man standing before her, his soul bared in his promises. It was the grandfather sitting proudly in the front row. It was the friends who had cheered for their love from the very beginning. Now it was her turn. She took a deep breath, her voice clear and full of conviction. "James," she said, her eyes locked with his, "you saw me for who I was, not who others wanted me to be. You have never asked me to be smaller, only to be more myself. With you, I am not afraid. I promise to be your partner in every adventure, to be your comfort, and to build a life with you that is not measured by its security, but by its joy. In front of all these people, our family, I choose you. My heart knows the way, and it leads directly to you." The rest of the ceremony passed in a beautiful, emotional haze. When the officiant finally declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," a joyful cheer erupted from the guests. James, with a brilliant smile that lit up his entire face, leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss full of promise, of victory, of a love that had weathered the storm and come out stronger. As they turned to walk back down the aisle, hand in hand, the organ swelled into a triumphant, joyful melody. The air, which had been thick with hushed emotion, erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. The faces that had been soft with sympathy were now alight with pure celebration. Sophie squeezed James's hand, a wide, genuine smile spreading across her face. She was no longer just a bride, she was a wife. The journey down the aisle had been a test of her resolve, but the walk back was a victory lap. The reception was held in a magnificent, high-ceilinged conservatory attached to the main hall. Glass walls and ceilings revealed the late afternoon sky, now painted in hues of soft pink and orange. Fairy lights were woven through the branches of potted trees, casting a warm, magical glow over the entire room. Laughter and music spilled out into the gardens, and the clinking of glasses provided a constant, happy percussion. The oppressive stillness of the morning felt like a distant memory from another lifetime. This was what a wedding was supposed to feel like, an unrestrained explosion of joy. Sophie and James moved through the crowd, enveloped in a sea of hugs, kisses, and heartfelt congratulations. Every person they spoke to seemed to share in their triumph. Many guests made a point to seek out George, shaking his hand or giving him a warm embrace, their eyes full of respect for what he had done. He accepted the praise with his usual humble grace, always deflecting the attention back to the happy couple. "I was just the escort," he'd say with a wink. "They're the main event." When it came time for the speeches, the best man gave a funny, charming toast, and Sarah, the maid of honor, delivered a tearful, loving tribute to her best friend. Then, George stood up, tapping his glass gently with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the man who had become the quiet hero of the day. He held his champagne flute aloft, his hand steady. "To Sophie and James," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Today, we did not just witness a wedding. We witnessed a choice to build a life based on what is felt in the heart, not what is written in a ledger." His eyes found Sophie's, and she knew he was quoting her grandmother's letter, sharing its wisdom with everyone. "True love," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "is not about finding a perfect path that is already laid out for you. It's about having the courage to forge your own side by side through whatever wilderness you may face. It's about being the person who shows up. It's about being the person who stands in the gap, who offers their arm when another's is withdrawn." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a profound and simple truth. He wasn't condemning those who were absent. He was celebrating those who were present. "My wife, Eleanor," he said, and his voice cracked just for a second, "always said that the bravest thing a person can do is choose their own happiness. Sophie, you have your grandmother's brave heart, and James, you have a good one. Together, you will be unstoppable. So let us raise our glasses to the life they will build, to the music they will create, and to a love that is, and always will be, more than enough." The room erupted in a chorus of, "To Sophie and James," and applause that was even louder than before. Sophie felt the tears coming again, but they were the happiest tears she had ever shed. She went to her grandfather and hugged him fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "That was perfect." "It was the truth," he whispered back. The celebration continued, growing more lively as the evening wore on. Sophie and James had their first dance, a slow, romantic waltz that felt like they were the only two people in the universe. Later, the band kicked into a higher gear, and the dance floor filled with laughing, spinning couples. Sophie, feeling lighter than she had in years, danced with James, with George, with all of her friends, her beautiful dress swirling around her. It was during a brief lull in the music, as Sophie was catching her breath by the side of the dance floor with James, that she saw them. Standing hesitantly in the main doorway of the conservatory, silhouetted against the darker hall behind them, were her parents. Her father was in a stiff, formal suit, her mother in a muted dress, clutching her purse like a shield. They looked out of place, like guests who had arrived at the wrong party. The laughter in Sophie's throat died. A cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach. For a moment she was frozen, the joy of the past few hours instantly evaporating. James felt her stiffen and followed her gaze. His arm immediately went around her waist, a solid, protective presence. George, who had been chatting with a cousin nearby, saw them too. His expression became unreadable as he slowly walked over to stand with Sophie and James. The trio stood together, a silent, united front, as her parents took a tentative step into the room. The few guests who noticed them fell quiet, the sudden silence creating a small, awkward pocket in the otherwise joyful atmosphere. Her parents' eyes scanned the room until they found her, and for the first time that day, Sophie was face to face with the people who had refused to walk with her. Her father's eyes darted from Sophie to James, then to George, who stood tall and unflinching beside her. Her mother's gaze was fixed on the floor, unable to meet her daughter's eyes. It was Sophie who finally broke the silence. She took a step forward, leaving the protective circle of her husband and grandfather, a deliberate act of self-possession. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't accusatory or angry. It was calm, steady, and clear, holding a new weight of authority. "Sophie," her mother began, her voice barely a whisper, We saw the pictures your friends were posting online. You looked so beautiful. And your grandfather?" She trailed off, finally looking up. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions: regret, shame, and a deep maternal sorrow. Her father cleared his throat, his usual blustering confidence completely gone. He looked smaller, diminished. "We were wrong," he said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue. "This was a mistake. A parent should be with their daughter on her wedding day. We should have been here." The apology hung in the air, an offering made far too late. The Sophie from that morning would have dissolved into tears, would have accepted it instantly in a desperate bid for reconciliation. But this Sophie was different. She had been forged in the fire of their rejection and strengthened by the unconditional love of others. "Yes," she said simply. "You should have been." She let the words settle, letting them feel the full weight of their choice. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stated the truth. "We wanted to see you," her mother pleaded softly. "To be here for the end of it, at least." Sophie looked past them, back at the reception filled with light and laughter. She saw George, who was now watching her with a look of immense pride. She saw James, who waited for her, his love a steady beacon. That was her family. "I am not the same girl you spoke to last week," Sophie said, turning her attention back to her parents. "That girl was hoping you would show up. That girl needed you to walk her down the aisle. But she's not here anymore. You made it clear that you couldn't support my life, my choice, my husband." She gestured back towards the party. "This is my life now. This is my family. You are welcome to stay as guests. But you must understand that my world no longer revolves around your approval." It was not an attack, but a declaration of independence. She was drawing a new boundary, one born not of anger, but of self-worth. Her parents stared at her, seemingly at a loss for words. They had expected tears or rage, or perhaps an immediate forgiveness that would absolve them of their guilt. They were not prepared for this calm, unwavering strength. Without waiting for a response, Sophie turned around and walked back to James. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I am," she said, and she knew it was the truest thing she had ever said. She looked at him and smiled, a real smile that radiated from her soul. "I'm more than okay." She did not look back to see if her parents stayed or left. It no longer mattered. She pulled James toward the center of the dance floor as the band started a new song. As he spun her around, her heart felt light and full. The letter, the tuxedo, the walk down the aisle, it all clicked into place. This wasn't a story about what she had lost. It was a story about what she had found. She had found her voice, her strength, and a love so powerful it could build a bridge where one had been burned. Surrounded by the people who had chosen to show up, she danced. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly free.